If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Luke chapter 7. This is where we'll be spending our time. Lots of people who don't know Jesus, and there are lots of them, who look in from the outside at you and me as followers of Jesus. They have a misperception about us. And it's a powerful misperception. As a matter of fact, in my view, it's a misperception that keeps many people from becoming part of a congregation. And that is, they look at us as though somehow we have done something that allows us to be in here. In other words, if you talk to somebody who doesn't know the Lord, their typical thought process is that they've got to clean something up before they can come here. They've got to do something to themselves before they can be part of a congregation of believers. And that is absolutely backwards. It's just backwards. Part of the problem is us. Sometimes when people come into a congregational setting and they're new, or maybe there are people that we know. That's even worse sometimes. It's somebody we know who's perhaps been away from church or never been part of a congregational life at all. And suddenly they appear in the congregational setting. They get a gaze, they feel a gaze that's like, what's the matter with you? They feel that. I want us to read this text and see just how opposite this all is in the way in which God really does work in us. I'll begin reading in verse 36 of chapter 7 in Luke. One of the Pharisees invited Jesus to dinner. And so Jesus went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating in the Pharisee's home, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and she stood behind Jesus at his feet weeping. She began to wet his feet with her tears. She then wiped them with her hair and kissed his feet and poured the perfume on him. When the Pharisee who had invited Jesus into the house for dinner saw this, he said to himself, "If this man really were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman this is. She is a sinner." Now I want to stop there. We're going to continue with the text later, but I want to stop there. This is an amazing scene. In the Middle East, this would have been a common scene in one respect. If you were a rabbi, you were a Pharisee, you were a person of note in Judaism, you were expected to be hospitable. If you had a meal, people would show up at that meal. You were expected to be hospitable to the people that showed up. This was a common practice. And some of the history here makes this, I remember, a little unclear to us. I remember when I was in Sunday school as a kid, and I remember this story being told. And I thought to myself, the image I had was Jesus sitting in a chair, like we do, and this woman crawling around under the table, crying and wetting his feet and rubbing his feet with her hair and then pouring the perfume under the table. And my image was, gosh, that must have been tough. I mean, a bunch of other feet are under the table too. There's a crowd gathered here. This is not just Jesus, Simon, and the woman. That's not the way it works. In the Middle East, at this time in history, and still today you can see this, people get on the floor to eat. And the table is just a little thing about this high. And they put all the food on the table, and everybody lays down on one side, props up, usually on their left. You kind of everybody has to lean on the same side because everybody's body is like flower petals around the table. So everybody's kind of got to face the same way. And then with the other hand, you eat. So for this woman to be behind Jesus and crying and wetting his feet was no big deal because his feet were out behind him, you see. And so this image then becomes a little more understandable if we look at it from the historical perspective. This woman has heard Jesus earlier. That's why she's there. So has the Pharisee. He's heard Jesus earlier. And that's why Jesus has been invited into the home. And there were other people there, as we'll see as the text goes on. So let's read the rest of the text here, and I'll begin reading in verse 40. Jesus answered Simon and said, "Simon, I have something to say to you." "Tell me, teacher," Simon said. 2 people owed money to a moneylender. One owed 500 denarii, the other owed 50. Neither of them had the money to pay the lender back, so the lender canceled both debts. Which one of them would love the lender more? Simon said, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled would love him more. Jesus said, you've judged correctly. Then Jesus turned to the woman and said, Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss. This woman, from the time I came in, has not stopped kissing my feet. You didn't put any oil on my head, but she has brought an alabaster jar of perfume and poured the perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, have been forgiven. She loved much, but he who has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven you. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. All right. A lesson shows up for everybody who's at the table, and there's a crowd there. Other people have come into this moment to sit and have this meal in the Pharisee's house. One thing that we get confused about many times is a lot of people will think this to be Mary Magdalene. Well, it's not. It doesn't say that anywhere. Mary Magdalene is the one that Jesus cast many demons out of. You remember her. But this is not necessarily Mary Magdalene, nor was Mary Magdalene necessarily a prostitute. This woman is a prostitute. She's known. That vial of perfume she wore around her neck, every prostitute wore that. That was the tool of their trade. You have to realize people in the first century didn't bathe like we do. We bathe at least, I'm guessing we all bathe in here at least once a week, right? At that time in history, that would be a lot. People didn't bathe very often. And so she carried that perfume because people smelled bad. She probably smelled bad. And that perfume made everything more pleasant for her customers. Simon has committed a lot of errors here with regard to hospitality. When Jesus comes in, you're supposed to give water to the person for their feet when they come into your home. If you've seen TV and you've watched Middle Easterners greet, what do? They embrace and they kiss each other's cheeks on each side. That's a common greeting in the Middle East. That would have been expected here. And if you came into someone's home at this time in history, there was a fragrant oil that usually was given to you to put on your head, a few drops because of the smell. It just made everybody's time together more pleasant. Well, Jesus didn't get any of these things. Jesus saw none of this. And so, I just picture it this way. Let me put it in a modern context. Let's say I invite you to my home for dinner. And you come to the door, and I walk up the door and I just swing it open and stand back. I don't say anything to you. You walk in. You come in. I don't say sit down or you want something to drink. I don't say anything. And then as soon as you come in, you're probably wondering, but you sit down in a chair someplace and I just go into the bedroom and close the door. You would think, I wonder what's going on. I mean, he did ask us over here to eat. What's happened here? It wouldn't seem right. This is exactly how this would have felt for Jesus in that moment. This is a totally wrong picture that this Pharisee has painted. So all of this hospitality that Jesus was not shown. Then you have Simon, who is just utterly, he's repulsed by this woman because of he knows who she is. Everybody in town would have known who she was and what she was. And Simon is sitting there and he's looking around at the other people gathered. He feels himself to be superior to the congregation that's at his table that day. He's the one who doesn't have any need for anything because he's not the center in the room. Everybody else is. That's his perspective. He believes he needs no forgiveness because he belongs to God. He's one of God's chosen, and he can stand off and look at other people and make determinations about them. Well, this woman has had her life changed. And so when she comes into this home, she's got a totally different perspective on herself than anybody else in that room has. She knows that she has had her heart broken and then she's had her heart healed. Jesus has done something in her that has changed her life. And she is filled with a gratitude for what has happened to her. And so when she comes in and she sees Jesus treated in this way, mistreated, it just breaks her heart. And so she starts to weep. And all three of the things that did not happen when Jesus came into Simon's home, this woman now provides. All three of them. The kiss, the perfume, the oil, the water for his feet. And then Jesus asks this amazing question. He looks at Simon and he tells that little parable about the lender and the debt holder and the two people, one forgiven 50, one forgiven 500. He says, which one would love the lender more? The one forgiven 50 or the one forgiven 500? And it's obvious what the answer is. The one who was forgiven the most would love the most. Which one comes first? Which one comes first, the forgiveness or the love? The forgiveness comes first. The same with this woman. She's forgiven, and now she loves because she's been forgiven. And this is where this can get really tricky for you and me. I think we have an expectation of people. Maybe we don't say it, but I think we do. If a person comes into our setting, and let's say, for instance, they don't know Jesus. They're in here, but they don't know him. And they come and they want to publicly say to this congregation, I want to be born again. I want to know Jesus. And we receive them. What do we expect of them? We expect them to be changed. I'm going to say this woman, I'd be willing to bet when she left this room this day, for a time she remained a prostitute. She remained a prostitute. We expect people to be good church people, just like that. That's not the way it works at all. I can't speak for anybody in this room, but I know myself, and I know there's a lot in me that God is still working to change and rip. And He'll be doing that until I take my last breath on this earth. That won't change. He'll work on me until I'm no longer one to be worked on this earth. And I just imagine in this moment, just imagine if you're sitting there, and let's say there's 10 people there. Jesus looks at Simon after he's told this little parable, and I bet you people are starting to smell the pheromones. They're starting to pick up on what Jesus is trying to get across. And he looks at Simon and says, Simon, when I came in here, you gave me no water for my feet. You gave me no kiss. You gave me no oil for my head. I'll bet you could have heard a fly on the back wall burp. I bet you it got really quiet when Jesus started to talk this way. Simon was blinded to his own condition. Just totally blind. He didn't understand. He thought that because he was a Jew, that meant he was God's, and that nothing else made any difference. This woman, we don't even know if she's Jewish. Doesn't say. She could have been a Gentile, but the fact that she was a prostitute meant that Simon, if he met in public this woman, he couldn't even be downwind from her and remain clean as a Jew. That's how they felt about people who were outside of righteousness insofar as the Jews saw themselves. This woman, she's totally conscious of who she is. She knows what she is. She knows that she's been forgiven of it. How open are we to that kind of forgiveness? Not once, but all the time. How conscious are we of who we are? Have we been forgiven much such that we then love much? I think it's a good exercise to go through and think of the things in the last 24 hours wherein we've thought something, said something, done something, felt something, looked at something, whatever it is, that we knew God was displeased with that. Defied our own conscience in some way. To reflect on that and say, gosh, there is so much that I need to be forgiven of constantly. How open are we to that? I think if we're not open to it, that saying we're followers of Jesus will become very, very stale. It'll just be something we say we are. And I look in this room, I know there are some very good reasons why people are not here today, but some of them are not so good. Is it that the relationship with God has just become stale because there's no sense of what we've been forgiven of? I don't know. I can't answer that for anybody but myself. Are there places in our lives where we're just kind of pretending? I don't know. Are we where God wants us to be? There's now therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, who don't walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. That's where we're supposed to be. That's what He's given to us as a gift. I think about the prophets. I've been studying the prophets for the past few weeks, and look at the history of Israel through the prophets. God blessed them. They got comfortable. They turned away from God. They looked at all the nations around them and they said, we want to be like that. And God let them go until He had to bring something into their lives to turn them back. He didn't turn them back because He's mean, and He didn't turn them back because He just wants to prove something. He turned them back for them, just like He does for us. He turns us back for us, not for Him, because it's the best thing for us. So how open are we in our lives? Do we have a relationship with God that is so near and dear to us that it surpasses all the other relationships we have? All of them. Oswald Chambers says our nearness doesn't come from obedience. It comes from relationship. And that's right. And if we think that we can behave our way close to God, that's not going to happen. A broken and contrite spirit is the kind of spirit God never turns away. C.S. Lewis said it so well. He said a car is made to run on fuel, whether it's diesel or gas, whatever it is. It's made to, that's what it runs on. Pour lemon juice in there, it won't go. He said we're made to run on God. And God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from giving us Himself. Ephesians chapter 2 says that salvation is the gift of God. It's not the gift from God. It's the gift of God. It's Him. He's the gift. God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from Himself. There is no way. There's no such thing from His point of view. We have to come to Him on His terms, not ours. Simon wanted to come to Him on Simon's terms. This woman came to Jesus on God's terms, and she was rewarded for that with salvation. I don't know where everybody is